Hi everyone, I can see you getting into the room and we're going to get started in about a minute. Hi everybody, I'm about to get started. I'm really excited. This is the first time I've ever done a public webinar like this. So I want to start off by telling you a little bit about me and how this all happened. And I think my story starts when I was about 11 actually, and part of my problem was that I had a real issue with body image. And so I dieted, I had an eating disorder, I over-exercised, I did all the things that people try to do to lose weight. And then one day when I became a clinical psychologist trained in South Africa, of course, you all sort of study your issues. And so weight became my focus. And for many years, I was a weight researcher. I really wanted to research, how did people lose weight? And what I discovered was that we really don't know that there is a way that people lose weight. And that's still true today. But my study started morphing a little bit in a very interesting way, because what I discovered in all this research was that there was a body of research that I kept knocking up against that really intrigued me. For example, I came across a Framingham heart study, and what that showed me was that women who believed, that's the word that I want you to hook on, that they were going to have a heart attack, were 4 times more likely to have a heart attack or die from a heart attack than women who didn't believe that. Now, if you think about our weight culture, part of the problem that we're dealing with is that our whole culture is immersed with the fact that fat equals disease, equals illness, equals death. And yet there were these little things that started to peek through in the research that made me really wonder, is it all about weight? And then Catherine Flagel did a huge study where she showed that barring the really high and low extremes of weight, the vast majority of people were actually living longer in the normal to overweight range. And so that started intriguing me as well because, I came across a study, for example, where they spoke about diabetes. And the thing that intrigued me was that they had to get almost to goal weight for their diabetes symptoms to go away. And then they had to only gain a very small proportion for all of the symptoms to come back. And I started being curious and thinking, is that all physical? Or is it that when I start to gain weight again, I start feeling hopeless, despairing? And does that have an impact on my body? There's a very large body of research that talks about the placebo effect. And in fact, we know that 32% of the effect of antidepressants, for example, come from the fact that I believe the antidepressant is going to work and not from the active ingredients in that at all. So I started looking at things like neurobiology, the biochemistry of emotions, and that opened a whole new field for me. So I started thinking about, what does our biology do when we're having a day where we feel less than? Now, it could be because of your body, but maybe you're just feeling like you're not achieving in life in general. What happens to your biology during that day? And if you look at how our biology works, the minute that we're under stress, we activate our HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary gland axis. And what that does is that prepares us to flee or to fight. But at the same time, it releases massive amounts of cortisol. And cortisol is one of the things, for example, that helps you gain weight. But it's also one of the things that if you have it in vast, you're actually busy eroding your health. I started thinking a lot about stress and the stress of living in a body that you feel is unacceptable, for example. But it could be the stress of feeling like you're not achieving at work. It could be the stress of feeling that you're unloved. Whatever that stress is, that has a biological correlate in our body. In the same way, when we're feeling happy and joyous, the same thing's happening in our body, except that what we're tapping into is a different system of the body, which is known as the relaxation response rather than the fear response. If you think about it, the American Stress Institute reckons that about 90% or up to 90% of all doctors' visits are stress related. And when I read that figure, I started thinking about my life that I was leading. because in the meantime, we'd moved to America and I had landed this incredible job. I mean, it really was an amazing job. Yes, it was 6 figures income. I was managing 29 pharmacies. And in the last 2 years that I worked there, they remodeled 23 of my stores. I was often up at 6 o'clock in the morning and working until 10 o'clock at night. I really was often working 90-hour weeks. And then I had a major crisis. And you know what? Crisis can be a good thing. I know it doesn't seem like it often when you're in the middle of it, but there are a few things that I know for sure about crisis. One, crisis is a great way to force me to move from one place to another. So crisis is a great way, if you're open to it, to have new doors open. And here's what I know for sure. You never have a crisis, ever, without doors opening all over that you can see if you're looking for them. The next thing I know about a crisis is that for me personally, the best way through a crisis is to get creative. And so I did. I started painting and I started decoupaging. And what I discovered was that while I was doing those activities, I just felt so much more peaceful. Even though I had a lot going on that was in crisis mode, it was amazing how everything felt so much better. And remember that I was telling you about those doors that open? So one of the doors that seemed to magically open was that I was invited to go to a seminar in Sedona given by the Heart Math Institute. And what I discovered about the heart was just phenomenal. I mean, we often think about our brain as being the master controller of the body. Think about it though. The heart's the first organ to form. It's the last organ to die. You can still live and be brain dead, but boy, it's difficult to live without a heart. So what I was finding out is that the heart apparently sends much more information to the brain than the other way around. The heart produces all the same endorphins and hormones that the brain does. It's its own mini pharmacy. It's incredible what the heart does. One of the things that I did at that conference was I bought a little heart rate monitor, a little biofeedback mechanism. And this was going to bring me an epiphany that I had never anticipated. I was sitting one day with my heart rate monitor on, just focusing on gratitude and, watching how my heart rate went into this very relaxed sine wave. And all of a sudden, and I have no idea how it happened, Pandora radio came on. And I just noticed that as it played the music, my gosh, my heart changed. The way that it played changed immediately. So I thought, gosh, I better fiddle around a bit. So I changed the station. And again, my heart changed so remarkably. And the epiphany for me was, I'm like an antenna. And here's something outside of me, the music, playing through me, and I can see it on a screen. And, I'd never thought about my environment playing through me before. I'd never thought that if I look at a beautiful picture and I'm drawn in by that art and I just immediately sort of feel peaceful inside, that has a biological component possibly. That maybe my heart rate is changing, that when my heart rate changes, how blood is delivered to my system and oxygen is delivered changes, everything changes. It was such a pivotal moment for me. I also noticed when I was doing my heart rate monitor that I could be sitting there focusing on gratitude and find my mind wander to something stressful. And the minute that I did that, I could see how my heart rate changed. It was such an amazing moment to realize but my thoughts are actually playing through my biology in some or other way. So if I thought about the position that I was in February 2014 when this work crisis hit me, I think of it this way. If my body had a body song, it would have been playing a grey funeral dirge. And what I really wanted it to play was a merry Mozart. I wanted it to sing with health and sing with joy. That's what I wanted. So I resigned, and I spent the next 2 years doing a really deep dive into the research. And what I found surprised me on one hand, but also just confirmed what I was really starting to believe. So, for example, I came across the work of Dr. Lissa Rankin, who wrote Mind Over Medicine. And what she said intrigued me because she used to have a practice in a very poor area. And then she moved her practice to Marin in San Francisco, which is a very affluent area. And she says in her book, she says, you know, it was amazing for me to discover that my marathon running, vitamin popping, juicing vegan Marinians were no more healthy than the people who hadn't really looked after their health, hadn't worried about their diet, and hadn't even done that much exercise. She said, it started me thinking. And she opens her book with a very provocative sentence. She says, what if I had to tell you that the least important thing about your health is looking after your body? And that really struck me because for all my life, I'd been trying to exercise and probably over exercising. I'd been so frantic about my diet, worrying about every calorie and every point that I ate, that the stress of dieting was enormous. And in fact, one of the research studies that I came across was where researchers had looked at the effect of just the stress of dieting on your DNA telomeres. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term telomeres, if you think about shoelaces, you know that little plastic bit at the end? The telomeres are almost like the little plastic bit at the end of our DNA. They keep our DNA from unraveling. And the longer your telomeres are, the longer your cells can replicate. And what they found is just the stress of dieting alone reduced the length of those telomeres dramatically. So here I was trying to diet seriously for my health and only finding out, my gosh, here I was reducing it by all the stress that dieting was causing. I also came across some fascinating research by Dr. Stuart Wolf. He was a doctor in the 1950s who worked in eastern Pennsylvania, and he noticed that there was a little town called Rosita that he never saw anyone with heart problems from. And at that time, saturated fats were the big ogre, and people in their 50s were dying off in droves from heart attacks. So he went to the little town and did some blood sampling and thought, well, you know, what is it? Because he didn't see anything in particular that stood out to him. He thought, well, maybe they exercise a lot. So he looked, but none of them jogged, none of them did marathons. Yes, they did have factory jobs, a lot of them. And so, you know, they were active a lot, but they really didn't do anything that was terribly active other than that. Many of them were overweight. So he was really curious about their diet. And he thought, well, you know, maybe they just eat a very healthy diet even though they're overweight. And what he discovered was that they ate a diet that was a dietitian's nightmare. It was something like 41% saturated fat. So he was really baffled. He thought, well, maybe it's something about living in the eastern foothills of Pennsylvania. And so he went and he looked at the two little towns on either side of it, Bangor and Bethlehem. Now, I omitted to tell you, by the way, that Rosita was a small town of about 1,200 Italian immigrants. And those Italian immigrants had been there since about the 1800s. Bangor and Bethlehem were also immigrant towns, very similar size, but they had German immigrants. They were also factory workers. But they, you know, Bangor and Bethlehem had the same rate of heart attacks as the rest of America did. Then he thought, well, it must be their genes. So he traced their relatives in the United States, and no, they had the same heart attack rate as the rest of America. So he eventually really studied this little town, and what he discovered was important because I think it speaks a lot about, you know, where we need to place our focus when it comes to our health. And by the way, when I finish telling you the story, I'm going to be taking a few questions. So if you've got any questions, just pop them in the chat box for me and I'll come back to them after I finish telling you the story. What he discovered about the town of Rosita was that they had a huge pride of belonging to this little community. 3 generations often lived in a house, and as you got older, you were honored and revered for your wisdom rather than thought of as old and put in a home or an assisted living center. They celebrated life. They would garden communally, but they would have these festivals where, like, let's say it was harvest time, they would celebrate the harvest. They were very joyous in their celebration. They were also people who knew each other by name. So this little community was a very tight-knit community. People had passion and purpose. They felt connected. They felt supported and loved. And ultimately, those things appeared to be much more important than what they weighed, what they ate, or how much they exercised. And I think that that is incredible when you think about all the health advice we get today. Now, am I saying stop eating healthily and stop exercising? Heck no, of course not. What I am saying though is how much stress do you put on yourself regarding what you eat? And how much stress are you putting on yourself about the whole exercising thing? And is there a way you can do it different? Could we play a little more? Could we rest a little more? Because there's so much more to health, it seems to me, than just what we eat and how much exercise we do. I'm going to check what questions there are in the chat room, and hopefully by now you've had a chance to think about something that you might like to know a little bit more about. Sharon asks, would hypnosis help? And Sharon, that's a really good question. There's certainly been quite a lot of research done on hypnosis, and I think that anything that gets you into a relaxed and calm state would certainly help, because there's no doubt that we rush around, we spend so much time being frenetically busy, and hypnosis is a state where you're in a relaxed state, where you're open to suggestion. So, as long as what's being suggested to you is good stuff, I think that it would be helpful. While I'm waiting for questions, I want to tell you another thing that I found fascinating as well. When I had this big job, the thing that struck me when I looked at it later is that I was so busy wearing exhaustion as kind of a badge of honor. It was like, oh, how many hours did you work? Oh, I know, I worked all night. How many hours did you work? How many hours did you work this week? And it's so sad to me that we live in a culture where, it's about busy, 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 being overscheduled, and we really don't have time for a lot of joy. Oh, I see there's another question. Okay, Doreen's asking, do I have an opinion about the book A Course in Weight Loss by Marianne Williamson? And I actually haven't read that book. I have read some of her other books, and I have to say that I do love Marianne Williamson, but I don't know what the contents of the book are. But I will tell you this. I really believe that weight loss is not necessarily where we need to be focusing. And the reason I say that is that in June 1998, 29 million Americans went to bed one night and they woke up the next morning, and if they had been a normal weight the day before, they were overweight the next day, and if they had been overweight, they were obese the day after. And what happened was that our BMI tables were actually hijacked by the only two pharmaceutical companies that had weight loss products on the market at that time. And they had formed an international obesity task force, but if you really looked at who was on that board, it was the two pharmaceutical companies. And so, we are thinking that we're so overweight, but actually the research shows that that's not the case. The problem is there are multiple industries that keep us feeling insecure around our bodies. If we had to suddenly feel secure about our bodies, oh my gosh, there are thousands of businesses that would go out of business overnight. And so they have a vested interest in making us believe that we need to be thinner than what our biology needs us to be. I mean, the weight loss industry is an enormous industry. Think about how the fashion industry benefit. You've got fat clothes, thin clothes, medium clothes, so they benefit. There are multiple industries that would just close their doors if it wasn't for us keeping them open. And the thing is that we're so focused on weight that I think that it's stressful. All the dieting that we do is stressful because we feel wonderful when we're losing weight, and then we feel absolute despair when we lose the ability to keep that weight off. And there is no reliable research anywhere that shows that dieting is a way of actually keeping weight off reliably. Nowhere. Even Weight Watchers, 84% of their customers are repeat customers, and they will actually tell you that their business is alive and well because of repeat business. Now, if it worked so well, they wouldn't have repeat business. Sharon, how did laughter affect your heart rate while on the monitor? Well, it's interesting because, laughter is also a form of excitement. So it definitely plays through you, and you can see the heart rate changing. It goes out of the sine wave that it's in, and it takes on a different shape. But I will tell you that laughter is hands down one of the best forms of healing that we can have. And, probably many of you have heard the story of Norman Cousins, who actually checked himself out of hospital and just watched comedy movies, because comedy movies helped him to actually heal. Julie says, how do we incorporate old-time living with modern living? That's such a great question, Julie. Here's what I think. We've got to find a way to appreciate the small things in life. We've got to find ways to slow down enough. I know it sounds like a cliche to smell the roses, because we are so busy trying to do everything and do it all. We've also got to realize that life is messy. I think that part of the problem is that we're so busy trying to be these achievers. We're so busy trying to please other people and look the part and be cool and fit in, instead of just remembering that we were all born sacred beings. I honestly believe it. And it's interesting, but if you look at what happens when we're born with something like 86 billion neurons, I read somewhere. And then we have a type of synaptic pruning that happens. So if you think about it, we're born with the potential to become anything. And then as we are conditioned by life and by our environment, some of those synaptic joins between the neurons and the nerve cells actually get pruned away. So over time, our neural networks get a little bit more solidified. So every time we're exposed to something in our environment, it strengthens a neural network. And so I think that to undo it, it's partly about being mindful and saying, wait a minute, what am I doing that's causing me to feel so out of step with myself? I know that when I had that huge job, my heart would race. I just wasn't taking time for me. I wasn't taking time to rest, and I wasn't taking time to play. And I think we need to laugh more. We need to live. We need to love more. If you want to book me to speak at your organization or company, or if you want to join my waiting list for some of my courses that are coming up, your Cracking Your Body's Health Code course, and I'm also going to be starting another self-love diet course. Now, the self-love diet course is specifically weight related. The Cracking Your Body's Health Code is more about biochemistry and just health in general. So I want to leave you with one last little thought. Health doesn't always come from medicine. Most of the time it comes from peace of mind, peace in the heart, peace of the soul. It comes from love, and it comes from laughter. And I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I know life is really busy, and so taking time out of your day is something that I appreciate. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.